Did it give you an announcement that it was recording then? Because normally it does. Anyway, it is recording. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me, everyone. This is the first session of collaborative conversations. So if there's a few hiccups here and there, apologies in advance. It's all a work in progress. My name's Nicola Steel. I'm the founder and director of JJP Talent Solutions. If you've seen the name before and wondered who's J and P, I'll give you a little intro. So J is Jessica, that black and white picture there when she was about 3. She's now 16 and the owner of this jacket. Don't tell her, she's at school at the moment. Then we've got Jasmine with a dolphin at SeaWorld there. She's about 5 and she's 11 now. And then the P is the little dog, Purdy. I put her out of this room because she'd make too much noise. Anyway, I've got 22 years IT recruitment experience, both here in Australia and also the UK. Ran one recruitment business in the UK and now for the last 5 years in Australia. And one of the things that I found over that since 1999 is getting that right culture fit is so important. And I met Viren just before Christmas on a similar event to this. And we started talking about culture, and he's a total expert in that respect. So this isn't about me, this is about Viren and about culture, about creating a winning culture. So I'd like to introduce Viren Thakrar. Viren is a culture strategist and also the co-founder of In the Game. He has got 14 years, sorry, I'm just checking I've got my stats right here, 14 years experience using psychology to help businesses improve culture, leadership, performance, and also recruitment, which is obviously my domain there. So Viren, please tell us all about your background, your experience in building winning cultures, and yeah, tell us more about you. I'll be quiet.
Great, thanks Nicola, and thanks everyone for dialing in on a Friday lunchtime from wherever you are. Really, I love these opportunities. One of our values is win as a team, and I really do believe you've got like these types of conversations, people coming together, sharing ideas. I think that's where great learning happens. So one of the things I would love to do, if you disagree with anything or you want to offer a contrary opinion, please feel free to do so. I think that's where there's a lot of value. There's for me, there's no, I don't think I have all the answers. I've got some perspectives, and all of you will have perspectives as well. So if we can get some of that on the table as well as we're going through the session, I'd love that. So feel free, if you do disagree with something, that's I think where there's often this is the value of these types of conversations. In terms of my background, I thought this is about winning culture and tech teams. So I thought I'd share my tech piece. How did I enter the world of technology? That's not the space I completely work in. I was very fortunate that my dad, when I was 7 years old, so quite a while back now, he bought home a PC. So he was an early adopter. He wasn't necessarily an innovator. He didn't build PCs, but he very early on saw that they were a very powerful tool. So he bought one home, and I became fascinated with technology, and actually Excel in particular. I love numbers. That's something that is important to me and the business. And I very early age, I developed an interest in numbers, and Excel for me just blew my mind as a young kid of what you could do with it. And I did start playing around with like coding little applications in Excel for small businesses. So that was my early foray into technology. Sadly, I might have ended up in the world of technology if I hadn't discovered psychology. And I discovered psychology as a 16-year-old. And again, that was another point in time where my mind was just blown completely. That there's all these things that happen in the back of our minds that we, especially when you're a teenager, you don't realize have such a big impact on how you behave and how you perform. And so that really opened my eyes to the world of psychology. I then studied in the space of sports psychology. Again, that has played quite a strong influence on kind of how I look at the world. But primarily then my working life has been spent in the world of business psychology. And as Nicola mentioned, working with businesses around people, culture, recruitment, leadership, performance, and all those types of things, especially with the lens of psychology. Does that help?
Absolutely.
Answer your question, Nicola? Yeah.
Yeah, and you come from that very much that psychology kind of background, which I didn't do a psychology degree. I did a geography and archaeology degree. However, I was fascinated by psychology as well, and you could quite often find me in the library in the wrong section. So, and I've maintained that interest, so I find it equally as fascinating. So Viren, in terms of having a winning culture in your team, why is it so important? Why are we even bothering to have this conversation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So look, I primarily work with businesses that are kind of small to medium and growing. So when I say my definition of that is usually around 30 to 500 people. That's my kind of sweet spot. And it's quite interesting looking at the kind of 30 plus mark, because this is where I think businesses gets quite interesting. Some of the things you start seeing as businesses grow beyond the point of the owners or the founders knowing everyone very closely is that you start seeing certain issues crop up. So I kind of, before we go into the winning culture, I like exploring a little bit what the opposite of that is, which is, I call it like a culture of friction. You start seeing culture being a little bit of a handbrake on business performance. And you see things like, one of the most common symptoms is silos. Teams start arguing with one another. You see silos within teams. There's just that friction of kind of internal politics. And often what you find in these businesses as they're getting bigger, the founders and owners and CEOs feel like things are getting out of control a little bit. So in response to that, they become a little bit more top down in their orientation. And as you're growing and you're recruiting, it's harder to maybe find people that are as invested in the business as, say, the first 10, 20, 30 hires. So you find people that are coming to work and not necessarily thinking about the future of the business. So then if you look at the winning culture, really it's the kind of, what we're trying to do is move away from some of those things. So moving away from just being top down to where a business where people do feel invested in the business, they're more proactive with coming up with ideas. You see less silos and more focused on, well, what's the outcomes that we're trying to achieve? And then there's generally a focus on growth, not just for the business, but also for individuals as well. So people are coming to work, and both people are improving by coming to work, and the business is improving as well. And the reason why that's important then is, I think if we flow onto the impact, well, if you've got a culture of friction, there's typically an impact on your ability to innovate as a business. You typically deliver poorer customer service. You typically find it harder to retain people. None of those things, any businesses don't want any of those things. What we do want is retaining of people that are important to the business. We do want people delivering great outcomes for our customers. And we do want to focus on growth and innovation. So a long-winded answer to get to, why a winning culture is important.
Absolutely. And I think particularly at the moment, the competition for tech talent, particularly software developers, software engineers, is intense. So before you're even thinking about hiring, you need to be thinking about retaining and having that awesome culture to keep your people there. That's the last thing you want. To actually hire people is a really expensive process. And I don't just mean the recruitment fee, the whole experience. So Viren, in terms of examples of tech teams, whether they're names like Atlassian, Canva, etc., or teams that you've worked with yourself, give me some examples of some really awesome cultures.
And I think you can look at the big companies and look at the small companies, but I guess I'm sort of going to throw a little spanner in your question as well, because I actually think one of the ways that we go a little bit wrong is we try and kind of look at a culture that's really strong and then try and just copy things that they're doing. And I think that's sometimes a little bit dangerous, because I think for me, culture and strategy kind of work hand in hand together, and your culture should help you execute on your strategy. And every business is different. There are things that are different about it. So you can't just lift things that work in one culture and put them into another. So that's my disclaimer, is I think being careful. I think there are companies like the ones you mentioned, I really do like what Atlassian do. They share a lot about their kind of processes. They share a lot about their culture. So I think there's a lot of inspiration to take from there, but I don't think it's just about saying, oh, this is what Atlassian does, so we need to then do this in our business. And then the other end of the spectrum, actually, I recently saw an article, one of my connections posted on LinkedIn, and she's at a company called Inlight. So I don't actually work with Inlight, but they're a digital company But there was an article they posted about transitioning to the new ways of work. And I really like some of the things she spoke about in her article about being values orientated, there's being a strong focus on testing and learning and adapting. So I think ultimately what I'm getting at is there's lots of business, I think, doing quite a lot of good things out there, but it's about taking inspiration from those, but not trying to necessarily just say, oh, this company did this, so that's what we need to be doing. I think that's
a really great point as well, because your business is unique. Yeah. You don't want to be a carbon copy of Atlassian or Canva or whoever.
And there's certainly some attractive things about those companies in particular. For some people that are building businesses that are looking at getting that kind of hyper growth and unicorn status, you kind of look at them and go, there's some aspirational things there. Yeah,
absolutely, gaining inspiration, but yeah. you're a unique business. So starting at the really foundational level and getting it right, how can leaders share their vision and their values, which are embedded in them, but in a more meaningful and exciting way to the rest of the team?
It's a good question. I think the first question I often will ask, I mean, are these things well defined? I think that's the first point. It's very difficult to then, embed and share these things if there's not a clear understanding of what these things are. So first step is, do you have, a clear understanding of, your vision and what your kind of cultural values are, or what you want them to be? The next question I tend to ask then, were people involved in helping shape that? And the third question I tend to ask before we even get onto the kind of making it fun and exciting and embedding it in is, if I ask people in your business to name your vision and values and talk about what makes them a little bit different to, let's say, your competitors, can you do that? Now, they're not easy questions to necessarily answer. And I find a lot of businesses haven't necessarily done those things. And this is where I find tech businesses are a little bit different in that they tend to be a little bit more, at least vision led. A lot of kind of, let's say you're a growing early stage tech business, you're around the 30, 40, 50 mark. You've often started off in a place where you've built a product that did have a very clear vision to start with. So I find this is where tech businesses sometimes are a little bit different, is they tend to have the vision piece better than some other industries and other businesses. They've got a clear understanding of why we kind of exist, what our product is there to serve. They often will work on roadmaps and things like that, so they've got a view of what that kind of looks like in the future. The values part is where I find maybe it's probably a little bit of, sometimes that's where it falls down a little bit in terms of how well embedded values are in the business. So I just want to make sure, is that kind of helping answer your question, Nicola, where you're going or what you were thinking?
Yeah, so I agree with you about, getting clarity on what the vision and values actually are. But how can you get everybody invigorated, excited about them within your team, so they're not just a list of things on the wall? Yeah, you might see them in every day, but are the team actually living and breathing them? So how do you get to that kind of stage?
Yeah, really good question. And I think a lot of it is to do with how do you create the time, space, and practices for your values. So if we kind of take the tech world and some of the tech businesses I work with, one of the questions I'll ask them is, you say customer focus is a value. And again, if we use Atlassian, they've got one, don't ship the customer is one of their values. So the question I often ask is, when was the last time one of your developers actually spoke or interacted with your customers? Like, if we say customer focus is a value, how well does each and every person in your business understand your customers, understand what that value looks like? And if your answer to that is you're not sure, then my next question would be, how do you work together with your teams to create the time and space and then the practices so they can do these things more often? So for me, it's time, space, and practice. You're going to hear this quite a lot probably through the session today. A lot of it is about intentionally creating that time, space, and intentional practice around when you can kind of exhibit these values. Innovation is often a common one. So I'll often go, what's the time and space you're giving your team to actually innovate in and amongst delivering work? And again, in the world of technology software, you've often got the deliverables, you're often shipping software, you're often pushing out features. There's often a lot of focus on the doing, but then how much time and space is there for then the actual innovation and creativity? So if you really want to live these values, you have to create time, space, and structure to do these things. Now, the part around the fun piece is, the fun piece isn't these like kind of just like ringing a bell every time someone does something, or these kind of rituals. There's nothing wrong with those. And I think if they happen organically, that's fine. They become a bit meaningless when they're forced onto people. So I think for me, I equate fun to engagement. So if people are involved in the process of shaping what these practices look like, they have a role in it. They're done with the degree of open-mindedness. They're done with a little bit of, fun in mind. That's how you can kind of bring it to life in a bit more of an exciting and energizing way.
Absolutely. Play together.
Like learn together, test and learn together, experiment together. I think moving away from trying to force things onto people, which is where I think that takes away the fun and engagement.
And allowing, I think, as you said, having that space to think and not just constantly doing. And also the space and the safety, the psychological safety of being able to make mistakes, to innovate as well, rather than the fear, oh golly, if I do this wrong, I'm going to basically lose my job, which isn't a winning culture really. So I spoke about the shortages in the tech market and about how it's really important to retain your people. Or it always is, but now even more than ever, the market as it is. So how can you really gain commitments from your team members so they're thinking really long term about the team itself and also the company as a whole?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important practices businesses can do, this applies to tech businesses. Some of the research here is tech businesses sometimes fall a little bit short on this particular aspect, which is how much interest you take in an individual's career growth and development. So I think it's flipping the conversation. If you want someone to take an interest in your growth and development as a business, well, then you also then need to take an interest in their growth and development and aspirations as well. So I think it's a two-way. Winning culture for me is win-win. It's got to be a win for both parties. So people, as I think I mentioned at the outset, people need to feel like by coming to work, by working for this business, I am not just doing something for the short term and getting paid well, which I think is, fundamentally is an important piece as well. We can't ignore the fact that if your salaries are well out of whack, you're going to find this piece around retention very, very difficult. But let's say we've got that base piece right, then it's like, how, when I come to work, am I improving and developing as a person? So I think one of the first steps and a foundational practice really is, my recommendation usually is every quarter, someone, usually that person's leader, is sitting down with that person and talking about, how's your career going? What are your longer term aspirations? What does the next quarter look like for you? And then how can we support you to get to where you want to go? And if you do that, then the person's got a level of investment.
Absolutely. So that two-way street. I mean, when I'm talking to candidates to help them prepare for interview, I say it's like a marriage. It's got to work for both sides. So it's not just all what you can give to them, it's vice versa. And particularly important with, if we're talking about the kind of market we're talking about now, where it is, the balance is, more, especially in the technology space, more in favor of the talent. So you need, I guess there needs to be, as a business, you need to clearly be able to talk to how are we going to support people on the journey. And where the businesses do this really well is they can actually give really good examples of, look, this person started out as a junior developer, and now they're in this position because we've worked together with them to grow and develop them as we've grown as well. So some great examples of how people have progressed from a junior to a leader, kind of examples, real life great examples.
Real life. So it doesn't necessarily have to be about vertical progression, but good examples of where people have managed to grow as the business has grown. So they've grown and achieved their own individual goals as you, as a business, have grown and achieved your business goals.
And I'm talking about retaining people. I remember I had this boss back in the early turn of the century, as my dear children would say. And he said that he wanted us all till we die, which was slightly scary. But the other thing as well, I think, is you might not retain somebody forever, but if you've given them a stepping stone to go into greatness, I speak to quite a lot of leaders that are really pleased that they've they've facilitated that opportunity for greatness as well. So yes, of course you want to retain them, but they are free to move on to the next thing. So sorry, I've just got my questions here and I've lost where I am.
No, it's okay. I can, while you're looking at the next one, I can just, one other thing I would like to kind of add in that kind of career development piece is also looking at it in terms of three levels. I think, one piece is around growing and developing the person so they can, perform well in the role that they're in. So I think that's kind of part one. Part two is then looking at growing and developing them for their future next role. And I think the third part, which is also important, is growing and developing them as a person. And sometimes, sometimes you do get, and I do find this in the tech space fairly often, is especially in the development arena, is software developers often, if they're in a good company, they're really enjoying what they're working on, they're really enjoying on the product, they're really enjoying the fact that they're getting to work with the latest code and latest technology. They tend to be quite happy in that. They don't necessarily have these grand aspirations of becoming the team leader or whatever else it might be. And you feel like, okay, they come to work, we give them what they need to do their role really well, is then almost inevitably that person will have things they're interested in that are not necessarily related to work, that you can actually support them in as well. So I think looking more broadly at what does development look like, it doesn't always have to be work related. And in fact, I've seen some great examples of where businesses have invested in not just their on-the-job development, but also developing stuff they're interested in outside of work. That might be time and space. It might be just a little bit of funding, and that person, they've got great results from a retention point of view, because the person again is feeling like the business is investing in me as a person to grow and develop. So absolutely. I think looking at that perspective of what development looks like is important.
Yeah, so it's not just about, for example, the code, what that person can develop. It's about their whole holistic being.
Yeah.
So it might be their family, it might be pursuing a sport or a hobby or personal development or an MBA or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But supporting and helping with regards to that, which brings me on to the next question as well. So how can you align as a leader within your team? How can you align individual, team, company, and also at the end of the day, you're doing it for these guys, the customer.
Yeah.
How can you align all those goals together? What would your recommendation be?
So my recommendation normally is, I'm quite a fan of this concept called kind of bi-directional goal setting. So really what that involves is I set a goal at a business level. So we kind of say at a business level, these are our goals, let's say just for the quarter. These are the goals that we're working on. Then the teams anchor their goals to the business goals. So instead of you kind of pushing down the goals, the businesses go, well, the teams go, what is our role in helping the business achieve these goals? Once the team's kind of gone through that process, then the individuals do the same. Individuals go, well, based on the team goals, this is the role I play in a team's success. And I think that process works quite nicely to get alignment. You don't have to force it quite as much. It's not pushed down from the top. So again, that word two-way, I think the two-way conversation is important. So ultimately it comes down to involving your teams in the goal setting process. So rather than saying, these are your goals, it's like, okay, well, if this is what the business wants to achieve, as a team, what's your role in this? And that usually then involves a bit of a conversation and a dialogue to get that alignment right.
So not pushing it on people, almost not extracting it from them, but
working
bringing
together.
So bringing everybody on board. And I think as well, to really succeed, you need really high levels of trust within teams. But how can you create that genuine trust? So there's genuine connection, collaboration, etc., both within the immediate team that people are working in, but also across different teams. So you don't have that friction, that siloed kind of approach.
Yeah. Look, trust is I think trust is a really interesting one, because you look at the benefits of having trust. I mean, I work with kind of leaders to ask them, why is trust even important? And often it's the case you've got things like trust is important because it does help with speed. You know, like let's say you've got a trusting relationship with someone, it does help you get to your outcomes a little bit quicker. You're not doubting the other person's intentions as much, for example. You mentioned the kind of concept of psychological safety. You know, trust is, there's a relationship there. And if you've got trust in your teammates, you're more likely to kind of share ideas. So you're right, trust is incredibly important. Usually where I kind of start off with is the relationship people have with one another and with their teams. And I often talk about kind of meaningful connection versus surface level connection. So surface level connection, you know, we often see business practices here like Friday night drinks, where people get together, they share, they chat. And again, these things are important, but by themselves, it's not enough. And the meaningful connection is coming back to how much time and space do we give to people to come together and really connect and understand each other's perspectives, understand each other's strengths, and really create the forum for people to share with one another. So I think that's kind of one part of it. And I think from a leader perspective, then I think what's important is, you know, Brene Brown talks a lot about this piece around vulnerability. There's a concept which I often go back to, which is called the trust equation, which is developed by the Trusted Advisor Institute. It's a really nice formula. And they talk about intimacy. And really what we're talking about here is, as a leader, you role model some of this stuff. So you role model openness. And typically the two places I talk about starting there are, first is openness when you've made mistakes as a leader. I think this is a really, really important one, is as a leader, you don't need to have all the answers. So if you're leading a business, you're not always going to get it right. You are sometimes going to make mistakes. Now, the more you hide that and don't share those mistakes, you're not really creating openness and intimacy, and you're not really showing vulnerability. And I think this takes away then from your ability to build trust. So I think if we're looking to start off, we need to role model some of those behaviors. And I think it is admitting when we've made mistakes, it's admitting when we haven't got things right. I think that goes a long way. The other part of intimacy then is also opening up more about yourself and who you are as a person. I think where leaders do a good job of building trust, you also know a little bit about them outside of just the sphere of who this person is when they turn up to work.
Yeah, so not a case of do as I say, not as I do, that kind of hypocrisy, which drives me insane, but also reveal a little bit of your own personalness. Obviously, you don't want to give too much information, but you know, whether it's your family or your hobbies or where you've been on holiday or wherever. So making you into more of a person, not putting you on a pedestal. There.
That's it. You eliminate some of the status dynamic, which I think is something important to do. And I think just share what you're comfortable with. But what I usually encourage most business leaders to do is probably share a little bit more than what you are doing at the moment. Like I think a lot of leaders feel like they've got to be guarded. They feel like they've got to be the person with all the answers. They've got to feel like I can't make any mistakes. And I think that's not something that goes towards building trust.
And do you think that sort of concern is created by the pandemic, or is that more of a general thing, would you say?
I actually think the pandemic, you kind of look at some of the silver linings that have come from it. And one of the things I think has been it, like that whole openness about who a person is, the impact that their whole of life has on their work life, the impact of mental health on performance. Like I think one of the silver linings is it actually has brought these conversations more to the forefront, and it's actually increased the openness with which people talk about these things. So I think COVID's actually, in the cases that I've seen, probably been a accelerant to some of these things being more, I don't want to use the word, but more acceptable to talk about. Is that the best phrase I can?
More of a leveler, possibly. I know I was on during lockdown in Brisbane last year, which would have been April, May, and I was on a similar thing to this, and there was a lawyer talking about very serious lawyery type things, legal things even. I'm not a lawyer. And anyway, his little boy, who was about 4 or 5, came and sat on his knee, and the lawyer just dealt with him so beautifully. And I thought just that almost kind of melted. He became less of a serious person and more, and just the beautiful way in that he handled his child and just sat him on his knee and continued with the conversation. It was so beautifully natural, but it kind of, that, oh my goodness, he's a lawyer, he's better than me, knows more than me. It just broke down the barriers. So I think COVID has brought that, but also it has brought some fear as well about, am I going to keep my job? Particularly last year, I think in Australia, we've been a lot more fortunate than a lot of other countries. But we won't talk about that dreaded C word too much. We're talking about the good C word, culture. But also in terms of identifying individual team members' strengths, weaknesses, and then overall skills gaps, what do you think is the best way to do that?
Look, I think there's lots of techniques to do this, from the kind of informal techniques to the more formal techniques. When I say formal, I mean things like, you know, putting people through assessments and things like that. But at a starting point, I kind of go, it's at a team level and a leader to individual level. It's about having these conversations more frequently. So having those feedback conversations more frequently about what are people doing that they're doing well, and what are they doing that's potentially an opportunity to develop, both at a one-on-one level and doing that at a team level as well. I think is really important. So increasing the dialogue around those types of conversations, making that a more frequent, creating the time and space for it. So that concept again. I think that's one of the most important starting points.
So creating time and space, not just doing.
Yeah. Look, and I think if you kind of bring, again, one of the things I do like about the world of software and technology is that there's quite a lot of good practices already embedded. There are practices like retrospectives that a lot of software businesses will do. It'll be a part of their ways of working. And I think what you could just simply add on this, you know, in terms of what was some of the individual's roles. So what were some of the individual's wins? You know, what did an individual do well? What skills underpin that? So once we start having that conversation, so it could be, you know, we thought Nicola came up with this awesome new feature for this for the sign up page, and it's really helped increase our conversions for people landing on the sign up page to signing up. Great. Now let's unpack what were some of the skills Nicola showcased in doing that. Like what underpinned that? So I think it's just taking that retrospective and just adding a little bit of a twist to what are some of the individual skills that contributed to some of the outcomes we got. I think, you know, that's one of the nice things about the world of technology and software. A lot of those rituals and practices are actually already used. It's just about adding a little bit more to it.
So in picking those skills and then seeing when they'd be transferable in another situation, or project or whatever. And we've spoken about retaining people, but there is a lot of teams are growing at the moment, particularly in the tech space. But you don't want to necessarily bring somebody in who's going to upset that culture. You don't want to bring on people that are carbon copies of each other either. So how can you maintain and enhance that winning culture by bringing more people on board, would you say?
Yeah, I think this piece, I think it's gained a little bit of popularity around this concept of culture fit versus culture add. And it kind of goes to the point you're saying, you know, if you want innovation, I really believe diversity of thought is really important. If everyone is a carbon copy, and I often use the example, if everyone in your business has gone basically to the same schools, they've studied the same types of things, they've grown up in the same environments, they're likely to come up with very, very similar ideas. I think if you want diversity, you need to be looking at, well, how do we bring in people that have got different ways of thinking, that have got different backgrounds? They're much more likely when they come together to then create different ideas. The hard part is that difference then becomes sometimes a little bit harder to manage. If everyone's really different, it takes more skills from the leader's part to create an environment which is inclusive, where they can tap into the different ways of thinking. So I think I personally believe when it comes to kind of bringing people in, the piece you don't want is someone that's kind of the antithesis of your values. So that if you've got certain values, I think if someone shows the opposite of that, I think that's going to more likely create issues for you. But what you do want is to get a spread of people that have got not just values that are aligned, but some values they bring that maybe your business doesn't have, but also then that skills piece. What skills and ways of working and ways of thinking and experiences they bring that are different to what your business has got. And I think that's the important piece, focusing on that.
Absolutely. You've made me think of a very interesting stat.
Yeah.
I don't know whether interesting stat's an oxymoron, but I was at the ACS Deloitte Digital Pulse 2021 event yesterday. And diversity was one of the big issues that was brought up there. So I'm just going to tell you the stats there. So at the moment, in terms of tech workers who are female, it's 29%, which isn't great. It's getting slightly better. But if we continue on the current trajectory, which I always have a problem saying, it will take 66 years for it to be 50-50 male-female. So I don't think I'll be in the world anymore if we continue there. But not only that, it's losing 1.8 billion into the Australian economy by not having that diversity there. And obviously, men, women is just one part of that diversity piece. Going a little bit off piece, but I thought as you were talking then, I thought that's a great opportunity to use my new stats. But that's brilliant. So yeah, don't make sure they're values focused, not that they're, your normal hoodie wearing 25 to 35-year-old male, went to the same uni, has got the same set of friends. But look at the values. So
look at the values, look at the mix of skills, try and, consciously, this is your realm, Nicola, but looking from the kind of world of recruiting, really considering, where I see businesses go wrong quite a lot is they'll go, oh, they need 5 years of experience in X. And I think there's a lot of good evidence out there. The years of experience is not necessarily the best predictor of future job performance. So reducing the amount of kind of what you're looking at in terms of years of experience, I think how you build your shortlist, looking at your shortlist and going, is there a good mix of people on here? Or have I really just got 5 carbon copies that I'm looking at? Or do I have a good mix that I can kind of go, I think, I've actually got someone in here. They don't fit the typical mold of what I'm looking for, but let's get them into the interview and let's have a conversation about what they will bring to the business that might be different to what someone else might bring.
Absolutely. And years of experience means nothing. You can have 10 years of doing exactly the same thing every year for 10 years. So you've got the equivalent of 1 year's experience. Or you can have 3 years experience, but have grown each of those years. So I think you've got to have an indication of what level you're looking at, but that actual timeline is almost meaningless. It's what's been achieved over that period of time, achieved and grown and all that aspect.
So I normally say quality of experience over quantity of experience. So look at the quality.
Great. I love it. I'm going to quote you on that.
Do quote me. The quality piece is important. So so really thinking about, well, what are some of the critical things they did in the time they were working at X, Y, and Z, and what are the critical things you need them to do in the role, and rather than looking at X years of experience.
Perfect. And also when I'm talking to candidates, one of the number one things that they want is autonomy. And autonomy, we've talked about innovation, creating game-changing products, etc., etc. But what's the best way that leaders can really provide that freedom, that flexibility, to have proper, genuine autonomy, would you say?
Look, I think the one piece is the mindset piece. This is the hardest one. Again, I see this in most leaders, especially if they're in a domain where they've also got technical expertise as well, is not thinking you have the right answer. I think that's the biggest mindset shift to make, is that my answer and my way is the best and only way of doing something. And that's one of the biggest mindset shifts to make, is always being the person that either has the answers or believing that your way is the best way. So I think fundamentally, if you don't shift that mindset first, it's going to be difficult to then create an environment where people have autonomy about how they work and the types of solutions they come up with. So I think that's part one. is
so the leader's mindset
mindset, the belief around
it's not just my way or the highway kind of.
Well, yes, my way is the best way of doing it. In fact, there can be many ways of getting to where we want to go, or there could be better ways that I don't know about. In fact, the belief almost should be there are better ways than I've got a team of talented people that if I create the right environment for them, they'll be able to come up with a better solution than I would be able to myself. Because I think if you don't believe that, then it's hard to then go, well, we're going to give people autonomy and freedom to come up with ways of doing things. And then I think the second piece with that is, I often talk about, you provide the end destination of where you want to go, but not how you want to get there. So if we kind of go, we use the example I used earlier, you're working with your development team, and you go, look, the end destination, we work together, we think the end destination to improve our offering is to get a better percentage sign-up rates on our sign-up form. So we need to kind of work on that sign-up process. And as a leader, then you just leave it at that. You kind of go, okay, team, now it's up to you. You figure out, how do we get there? We'll work together. I'll support you. If you've got questions, let's work together to figure it out. But it's not you going, and I think what we need to do is we need to move that button. We need to reduce the amount of pages on the sign-up form from 3 to 2, and we need to change all the titles. So go away and do that. That's quite a different way of delegating the task. And if you do it in the latter way, I think you don't tend to get great innovation. It doesn't feel very autonomous. It feels much more micromanagey. Whereas the first way, where you set the destination and you give more freedom, then you tend to get better outcomes. You tend to get people thinking a little bit more about, well, what are the different ways we can achieve the end destination, the end outcome? So
give the final outcome, but quite wide parameters of how you can get there, basically.
Exactly.
Awesome. That's brilliant. And so you, in the game, the name of your organization, you've created over the last 12 months, I think, a framework called the Winning Six Framework that pretty much brings all this together. So in a snapshot, tell me about the Winning Six Framework and how does it bring everything together?
Yeah, look, I think we've actually touched on, probably intentionally on your part, we've touched on most of the Winning Six as we've gone through, but like as a recap, for me, the first couple of parts of the Winning Six are around everyone really getting behind, or what's the business vision and values? So where are we going, and what's our ways of working? What do we really value as a business? Part of the next step then is translating that into, what are clear goals? So what are the goals at a business level, team level, individual level? What are our customer goals? And really everyone should be able to understand that we've articulated these, we know what we're working towards. So it's breaking down I think sometimes the less tangible stuff, and goals are very, very tangible. So it's like, well, what are the specific outcomes of success, and what does great look like? Then I think the piece is around fostering connections, a deeper connection in your business. So the connection people have to their own team, that teams have to one another, I think is a really important component. Then you've got the piece around skills. So do you really understand as a business what your strengths are, where your gaps are as a business from a skills perspective? Do teams understand that? Do individuals understand that? And then the next piece is around creating opportunities. So how do you create opportunities for people to move around your business? And then when you're bringing people into the business, how well do you go about recruiting them? And the last piece, as we just finished on, is how then do you create more autonomy in your business, more freedom about where people work and how they work as well. I think if you do all those things, that it taps into really the core drivers that people have. So when we look at the research from the world of psychology, people have 3 fundamental needs. They've got a need for kind of purposeful connection. They've got a need for kind of growth and development, and they've got a need for freedom and autonomy as well. And like by doing those 6 things, hopefully we tap into the drivers that everyone has.
Fantastic. And you're right. I did I did arrange my questions pretty much around your framework. And you've also got your scorecard, which I think examines a lot of the elements of those Winning Six, as you call them. Would you mind putting it in the chat box for everyone?
Sure, I can pop that in, and it's a nice short scorecard that
I think it takes about 3 minutes. Is it?
Yeah, average 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And really just explores. It gives you a little bit more detail on some of what I call the building blocks. So it kind of explores how well you've kind of implemented some of the building blocks of
so if you put that in there, and then people can just click on the link, and if they want to have a go and what have you. And also, I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, why has Viren got boxes and boxes of what looks like Kleenex tissues behind him? So tell us more about what those are.
I'll actually grab an open copy here.
Don't worry, everybody. It's not Viren's got a bad cold or anything.
No, look. So part of the reason the company's called In the Game, business is called In the Game, is I love games. So I play video games, board games, and games are actually a very powerful way of creating kind of change. And so this particular game is a game. I use it in two ways. It's called Quinks. Here's the nice box. So Quinks is all about fostering deeper connection between teams and also helping leaders build the skills of powerful questions, active listening, and forming deeper connections and trust with people. So some of the concepts we touched on earlier, Quinks is a board game to help build out some of those skills within teams and with leaders as well. So it's a fun little game. The objective is you complete a little values wheel about your partner. So Nicola, if we were playing, my objective of the game would be to understand what your values are by playing the game. And that's a nice little end outcome. So it's a whole bunch of board games, not tissues.
I did actually know what they were, but I was asking for the benefit of everyone else. So thank you very much, Viren. I think we did get a question in the chat, and we'll open up the opportunity for everyone. I can't speak today, sorry. For any questions. So let me just go into the chat. Byron, I'd be keen to hear Viren's view advice for developing culture performance when working with offshore developers. That's a great question. So if you want to answer that, Viren, and I'll just check in the chat box.
So what one of the concepts we kind of talked about earlier is this creating the intentional time and space. So if you're offshore developers, one of the questions I'll start asking to build that culture is, what are some of the practices that you've got with your offshore team that either with you as a business leader and with them at a one-on-one level, and then how often do the team come together and what types of things do the teams talk about? So kind of starts off with your values. So let's say, for example, you're trying to instill values of customer focus and innovation. So how often, even though they're remote, how often do you kind of bring people together to talk about those concepts? How often do you give people time and space to work with those concepts? So it's the intentionality piece, which is, I think, one of the biggest things that most businesses saw last year when they went fully remote or hybrid, is you've got to be really intentional. When everyone's in different spaces, you've got to be really intentional about how you bring people together to create your culture. So I saw a phrase earlier last week on LinkedIn, which is, your culture is not your building. So your office building is not your culture. Your culture is kind of how you go about working, how you bring people together, the types of systems, processes, and practices you have. So if you've got an offshore team, intentionally think about, well, when do people come together? How do we interact? What are some of the other processes that we set? So how do we go about setting goals? How do we go about reviewing work? How do we go about providing feedback? Because all of those things are your culture, and the way in which you do that, if the team's fully remote, if they're in person, doesn't matter, but those practices done intentionally is what creates your culture.
Absolutely. And there was another, it wasn't a question as such, but I think you might be able to shed some light on it. So Kerry Young, she wants to build engagement with and ownership of culture within her teams. And she's got a real focus on neurodivergent employees as a big interest of hers. So is there any particular advice or examples that you could give there at all, Viren?
So I won't be able to talk to neurodiversity specifically. What I can talk to more is that piece around diversity of thinking. So if you've got different ways of working, different ways of thinking. So the two parts there, and again, I'll use that kind of word, time and space. So one of the things I find, you look at most business practices, let's take meetings, for example. Meetings are a really good one. You bring people together, and often you've got a very short amount of time to digest and share information. So someone talks at you for maybe the first 30 minutes. And then you've got 30 minutes to quickly work together to form solutions. That doesn't actually foster an environment where different ways of thinking can work. So you can quite quickly see that if you're someone that likes processing information and it takes a little bit longer to do that, and in an environment, then you've got to come up with and you've got to think about things on your feet. Well, that environment doesn't support diversity of thinking at all. It supports people that think on their feet really quickly and that can read information really fast. So it's taking those practices like meetings and going, well, how do we make these more accessible and inclusive? So for example, we might go, we do not run meetings unless we've sent out the pre-reading and thinking in 2 different formats 3 days before the meeting. So it needs to either be in a written format and a short video. So it doesn't matter what your style is, then you can kind of process that information in your own way and time. And then in the meeting is then about time and space for everyone to share X, Y, and Z. So intentionality is really important. It's thinking through how are we sharing information? How do we allow different voices and different types of thinking to share in our meetings? So our meetings is one of the, fundamental practices. Nearly every business does too many of them and they're done too poorly. It's flipping them on their head and think about, well, how do we allow different ways of thinking to contribute and not include or exclude, that's the word, exclude people that think in a different way and process information in a different way. Kerry, does that help kind of tap into your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much, Viren. The other aspect that I'm really wrestling with in my organization at the moment is getting people to understand that culture is everybody's business. It's not just HR. So it's really encouraging people to take ownership and help to build and develop. So some of the things that you talked about earlier in the session are really helpful. And obviously working in tech, hence the neurodivergence interest as well.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Kerry. And I think I love that point. Culture is everyone. Everyone contributes to culture. And I think so. The flip of that is then involving everyone in the process. I think it reminds me one of the mistakes I often see then is just these processes and practices then just being pushed down without actually asking people, well, what do you want? Like, tell us what works for you. What would make these, like, again, I will use meetings as my punching bag. What would make the meetings more accessible and better for you, rather than pushing stuff onto people, involve them in the process. Yeah.
Thank you. And Liam's got a question here. What is the most common issue faced with work culture, and how do you go? Sorry, I can't speak today. How do you go about rectifying that issue?
Oh, if I go most common, I would say most common, if I kind of just summarized it, would be way too much focus on task and not enough focus on people. So just it's focus on just doing, getting things done as fast as possible, and not enough time on how do we better operate and work as a collective.
Fantastic. Love that. Got my brochure here, and it's all about the people, the power of people. They're not widgets, they're people.
And actually, one of the things I will share, Nicola, with you, so you can kind of send that to everyone. I've got a little guide. It's like a guide on fostering deeper connection in teams. And it's got some like really simple ideas, which again, you can just use as a little bit of inspiration for some practices you might be able to introduce together with your teams that might shift it a little bit away from just being task focused, and they're focusing a little bit more on genuine team connection.
That would be brilliant. If you could send that through, Viren, and we'll send it to everyone that's been on this session, and I can send them your scorecard as well.
Fantastic, thank you.
And we'll do that later on this afternoon. And a question here from Lydia: How do you encourage senior staff to be good mentors to others? And if others are overprotective on their job knowledge and don't want to share?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think it taps into, we talked about a little bit about the fear people have of, job security. And so people feel like, if I start sharing information and I upskill other people, where they're going to take my job. And I think one of the business practices here, and this does come down to a little bit about, espouse values and how you manage your leaders as well, and how you incentivize them and the types of things you talk about. Where I see businesses do this well, if you do some form of engagement survey, it's often kind of then owning that kind of metric at a business level. And this is your performance as a leader. And I think leaders have, especially if you're kind of in a middle leadership position, you've got one of the hardest roles, because it should be the most selfless role in a business. You're there to help the business achieve the business goals, and then you're there for your team and people to help them grow and develop. And I think those types of things have to be really clearly communicated with leaders around what are the expectations of a leader's role. How are they kind of, how is their performance measured and evaluated? So what are some of the most important things to do that? And then the last piece is also then taking an interest in that individual leader's growth and development as well. So if we're kind of saying, look, the only way you can grow and develop into your next role, or wherever you want to go next, is if people can grow and develop and step into your role. Like that's part of the process. So I think showing that interest in a senior leader's career development as well gives them that buffer to go, okay, I've got options, I've got ways of developing, I've got ways of growing. And I can then pay that forward as well by helping others grow and develop as well. Does that help answer your question, Lydia?
Yeah, very much. I wish everyone, all the bosses and managers have attended this seminar, even just for 1 hour. You learn a lot, from you, Viren. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lydia.
That's brilliant. Well, it's good to be useful. And also, Viren says that their team run regular 360s, so having that similar sort of approach.
Those frequent feedback conversations, just getting the feedback on the table and having those conversations it's important.
And if you're offering the benefit of sharing the knowledge to then allow that person to grow into their next role, it's a win-win situation for everyone.
And actually, one last point I would like to make with that, because you kind of reminded me, one of the best things a senior business leader can do is really lead loudly when someone does something that you think is good. So if you see an example of a team leader sharing knowledge and growing someone, really make a song and dance that. Go, look, it's great. Viren, the last 3 people he worked with, they've all gone on to these awesome roles. They've kind of stepped up. They've really hit their own strides. And that's a lot to do with the role Viren's played in terms of sharing his expertise and knowledge with them. As the more you kind of, recognize and celebrate the good behavior, that's another great way of kind of going, look, if you're a leader that doesn't do that, you're not doing the things that we value as a business.
Absolutely. And sharing that knowledge. Yeah. Now, Anthony Rimmer, I'm not sure whether that's a question or a statement there about greatly improving the journey of learners. Isn't Anthony still there? Oh, there he is.
Yep.
His video is not on. Anthony, are you there? You've microphone.
Yeah, I'm here.
There
Sorry.
we go. Did you have a question?
No, I just put an introduction in. I think everyone was introducing themselves earlier on in the chat.
That's fine. I was just checking you weren't being ignored. And Kerry says, sorry, Anthony, good to see you again, and exciting stuff. I'll catch up with you later. What was I going to say? And Kerry likes lead loudly. Easy to remember and do. Now, I know I said that this session would last an hour, which it has done, but has anybody else got any questions or anything they'd like to ask Viren? Put your hand up or just unmute yourselves. No, okay. Well, thank you very much, Viren.
Thank you.
It's been a great session. Thank you. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I'll email Viren's gift that he talked about, also his scorecard. And I'd also love to include a really short survey, like a 30-second one, just to get people's thoughts about this particular session and how it can be improved as well, because I'll be doing one of these events once a month. And then the next one actually will be in August that I've got planned is with a migration lawyer about diversity and also bringing in talent from overseas and how there are ways and means about that. But hopefully you can attend that next time. And I can just see one question in the chat here. It's from Kerry. Thank you very much. Great session, Viren and Nicola. Thank you very much, Kerry. Thank you for attending. And everybody thanks, Byron. Everybody have a super weekend. It's a bit wet and miserable. Viren and I feel very at home. Like being back in the UK. It reminds us of home, but in a bad way. Liam, thank you. And yeah, have a super time. And if you want to speak or connect with either, thanks, Lydia. Speak to either Viren and I. We're on LinkedIn. Obviously, I've been emailing you, so you've got my email address as well. And thank you very much. And
Thanks,
have a lovely weekend. Thank you.